As we look at what now, what next, we got Dale Myers. Dale Myers didn't join us here, I guess, huh? Dale Myers is tired, ladies and gentlemen, but we love you, Dale. Thank you for all your great work. He's the man President Reagan called after the shuttle disaster and said, help. All right, final stretch here, guys. What now, what next? I'm going to make this a group discussion. You just jump in. Where are we going after this? What happens next? I mean, there's a lot of talk. We touched on some of this through the evening, but do we have the political will? Do we have what's needed to today go? You touched on this earlier, Bill Anders. Maybe you want to lead off with what's next, what should be next.
Well, I may be the skunk at the garden party. I think the shuttle was one of the biggest mistakes that the United States has ever made. It was responsible for stopping the Saturn V. It's a wonderful vehicle. I'd have loved to have flown it myself. I have great admiration for the guys who did. But it was supposed to cut the cost to orbit by a factor of 10. It increased it by a factor of 10. That's a 100-fold error. And as exciting as it was, it ate NASA hollow. NASA was hardly able to do anything else because of this wonderful but extremely expensive vehicle. And I just hope that NASA looks back and doesn't get carried away with making a lot of noise and smoke and whatnot and do things that make sense in the future. I'm not optimistic about that.
Anybody agree with the skunk at the party? I agree. No, it's very true because it took other things away from the process. Gene, you went with Jim Lovell. Jim and Neil Armstrong testified in front of Congress in recent years. Either of you want to dive in with where you see where we ought to go?
Yeah, we since the days of Kennedy, we have a very bipartisan Congress when it comes to space. I think we can say that.
Or anything.
Well, yeah, not in everything, but we do have a bipartisan. But the problem is the inertia in Congress is so great that the administration can cancel Constellation, and you can find reasons why or against. I think it was another big mistake. A program that was going to get us back to the moon probably in the early 20s and continue on to Mars within the next generation. And people say, well, you didn't have enough money. Well, it's not how much money you got, how you spend your money. But the administration can do something like defund, and when you control who's the people who control the money? Anyway, when you control the money, and the White House does, they can start defunding things, and by the time the Congress catches up, it's too late. And let me just say one thing. We find ourselves here today. I walked on the moon 42 years ago. We were launching to the moon, starting with Apollo 8, almost every 2 months.
2 months, right.
Launching to the moon every 2 months.
Yeah.
It's inexcusable and unacceptable for us almost a half a century later to be sitting here talking about not even being able to get to our own space station. We can't put an American in space on American hardware. That's unacceptable, intolerable, and that, I remember the words about fundamentally transforming America. Well, we started with fundamentally transforming the space program, and it's 99% complete at this point in time.
Al Worden?
I guess the first thing is that I totally agree with what Bill Anders said.
There.
How's that?
Thank you.
Okay, good.
That's from a West Point guy.
I do. I think the shuttle program was a divergent program. We lost our focus on what we should be doing. But I have another thought that really takes us a little further into the future. One of the problems we have is that we don't think in long terms. We get very excited or we get very disappointed if we don't do something in the next year, the next 2 years, the next 10 years. We say we'll go to Mars in 20 years. Maybe we won't do it for 100 years. But we need to take a very, very long-range view of things. And I don't believe it makes any difference the ups and downs of the government, because eventually we're going to go there anyway, because it is a human imperative for the species to survive. And the day will come when we can't live here anymore. We know that. Everybody knows that. So we're going to have to go somewhere else. And I like the idea. I like what Rusty had to say about human intelligence getting off the Earth and propagating out through space. The same things happen here on Earth. If you look at all the tribes in the Pacific Basin, that's exactly what happened. They all started in one place and they moved out when a natural disaster occurred. We're no different from that today. And we know that the Earth isn't going to last forever. And this may be thousands of years. It could be longer than that. We got to develop all kinds of propulsion systems and learn how to stay alive and all that kind of stuff. Long-range program. We can look at the short range and be very unhappy or very happy, whichever your bent is. But in the long range, we're going to get there because it's our genetic drive. It's our imperative to keep the species alive.
Final thoughts from the rest of our panel. Jim Lovell, just to dovetail on that, because again, you went, people go public in various ways, but I remember you're testifying there with Neil and with Gene and Congress, and you guys didn't hold back. I mean, you went on record, and you wrote op-eds and all that about where we're going.
Mark, these gentlemen did make most of the comments that I think that most of us think about. I do think, though, that we need a program that we can all be proud of, one that America, the citizens could look back at and say, hey, we did that, we can continue to do that. The program does various things. It is really a spur to the education of young people. A week doesn't go by that I don't meet somebody in their 50s or even early 60s that says, listen, when you flew, I was about a 10 or 14-year-old, and really, that gave me the incentive to go out and do something like being an engineer or something like that. And so in that respect, I think that it should be there. And it still provides technology to the private sector. Throughout all the stuff that we use now, computer technology got some of its beginnings in our space program. So I think all those things are still there. I don't think it uses that much money as compared to what we use some other money. And I'll leave you with one last thought. If you saw the movie Apollo 13, and you saw the last sequence of that movie, it was on the carrier deck, and Tom Hanks was walking across the deck, and he was saying to himself, I wonder when we'll go back to the moon, and who will that be? That's the last words he ever said in that movie. And now it's what, 42 years or 45 years since we made our last flight? And those words still ring true.
All right. Thank you, Jim Lovell. Gentlemen, parting thoughts on this future?
Yeah, I think that it was discussed that when we terminated the shuttle program without having a system that would get back into space, we not only lost the access to space, we had to buy it from the Soviets. But I think even a greater failure than that was we lost the generation of people that were working in the space program, that were managing the risks, designing the spacecrafts, and carrying us towards the future. These were the people, the books have been written, the technology's there, but you need the people to do this. I speak to every group of co-ops that goes through Johnson Space Center. 2 years ago, we had a class graduating in December, and NASA, it was about 100, and NASA only hired 2 of those people. Each year, I see fewer and fewer and fewer people going through the co-op program. They're now going to other industries. So I think the real challenge, it's going to be easier to build the space systems of the future than it is to build the teams capable of designing and managing the space systems. And that is the job that we must step up to. We must become foot soldiers of space, and we must carry the message forward that space is not only necessary to our survival, it is necessary to a generation of youth who are believers in the work that we did, who are going to carry America into the future.
All right, Gene. Glenn, Fred, final thoughts?
Just a comment to Bill's going back to NACA for space. I served on the President Reagan transition team under George Low. We were asked to present a low, medium, and high road, which basically would be that low road, which would close up a lot of shop around NASA if you went that route. The thing that we've lost, though, I think, and I don't know how to get it, even if you went that way, is to somehow have the impetus to do whatever the mission is with the right support, which we've not had since Apollo. I left the astronaut office and for 4 years went to the orbiter project office under Aaron Cohen. The first 3 years of shuttle, we had half the money of the program plan. So we did some extraordinary things to make it fit. The Challenger was never supposed to be a flight vehicle, for instance. It was our structural test article, which we took only to 80% loads. We completely deleted fatigue tests. Vac thermal, we only did 1 ohms pod and 1 payload bay door. We only did, and this really scared me, vibroacoustic only on the aft section of the ship vehicle. We did no vibroacoustic on the crew cabin. Enterprise was supposed to have a second vehicle. You don't like to do a test program without only 1 vehicle. That was reflected by the crew the first time Gordo and I climbed aboard, the first time we're going to release it. They had a couple of figures that looked like us on each side of the ladder when we climbed up to get upstairs. And the saying said, if you follow this up, this is your next job, sitting on floor sweepers. But it was the same way. I went off after I joined Grumman, and I ran the system integration, system engineering job on Space Station, again for about 4 years. In 1987, if 1 vote had passed in the House of Representatives, there would be no space station today. 1 vote. Wow. I was doing serious recruiting to get engineers from all over the country to join me on that program, and they were already putting out their resumes, worrying about what their next job was going to be. So that's the kind of environment it's been under. And I'd agree with Bill. The shuttle, and others have said that the shuttle has gotten us off track from, call it, pure exploration. But again, indeed, if you wanted to plan that kind of a vehicle, I'll say, again, you would do it for the long haul to make it the right vehicle. If you look at airplanes, they go through from a prototype to like the 86 is a good example, F-86. Had an A model. The best of the 86 of all was the H model. Again, we were short money. Even Kennedy, we could not modernize Kennedy. All those systems out at the launch pad were Apollo. When we had to change a filter out on the cryogenic system, the vendor was gone. You had to do reverse engineering, very expensive. We could not employ automation to the extent we would if we're going to do it again. So I think you could do a better job. But again, I'll agree that getting stuff up to low Earth orbit is probably not NASA's primary job. That it ought to be an exploration.
All right. Fred, Glenn, thought?
There have been a lot of good comments here. The other one I would make is I go out to the Space Center off and on, and I have to say that I feel a sense of sadness about it because the folks who came to do space, and in their minds they were going to do the space that we had a chance to do 50 years ago, they were hoping that they would have a chance to do that themselves. The world has turned, it seems, in other directions and is not so willing to embrace that. But whatever we choose to do, I hope we can get behind something that represents the same kind of challenge and the same kind of attraction for our young people that joined in the beginning. And I think there's room in all that's being said here, plus some of the things that are being done in our commercial industry that should allow us to form a space program that's attractive, that satisfies the needs of the young people, and that is worthy of this nation. So I'd like to see us get on with that.
Our panel, Glenn Lunny, Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, Gene Kranz, Al Warden, Bill Anders. Tonight playing the skunk at the garden party, but we love that. It was Catalyst. And Gene Cernan, ladies and gentlemen.